the Gospel of Matthew, this poignant story. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in his synagogues and proclaiming the good news in the kingdom, curing every disease, every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. So he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, to cure every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simeon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: "Go nowhere among the Gentiles, enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the leopards, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment." That is God's word to us and God's challenge to us. Most of you don't know this old man who was invited to lead worship with you today. I've been in this presbytery since 1966. I was the pastor at Celtic Cross in Warren for many years, and then because I have some studies in psychology as well as in theology, I was invited to do interim pastorates in some of the churches facing challenges, and have enjoyed doing that. And then I was asked in 2000 to help the presbytery make a transition, and served as the executive for that year of transition. And then the Lilly family was very generous to the Ann Arbor First Presbyterian Church and gave us funds to do a new experiment called residency in ministry. And I was invited there to help them organize that. Now we have had 18 young ministers right out of seminary come in classes of 3 and stay 2 years, where we can expose them to the various aspects of ministry and help them determine where their strengths and weaknesses are, how they may make the most out of their call to ministry. Then I retired at the end of, I think it was 2006, and still enjoy being a part of that family, and I'm glad to be a part of your family with you today. When God invited Sarah and Abraham, these old people, to become parents to the people of God, their lives were radically revised. Their retirement plan suffered great disruption. Sarah became pregnant with Isaac. She could hardly believe her good fortune with which God was overwhelming her. Her laughter expressed her amazement, but her joy that she would now become the person she'd always wanted to be. Sarah was chosen by God to be a servant of God. Perhaps in the past the world had laughed at Sarah, her inability to conceive, but now the world laughed with Sarah. She was fulfilled with God's presence in her life. Are we fully realizing the potential God has placed in our lives? Does the world notice our lack of fulfillment? Is there a possibility God's Spirit might enter our lives at whatever age we may be and impregnate us with new life to be God's faithful people? You see, we are, each one of us, people poised on the edge of a pregnant potential. The question we need to consider is, what sort of new life is God's Spirit offering you in the decade to come? What sort of people will you become? Not sort of what a people have you become to this point, but where do you go from here on? This church is even older than Sarah was when she conceived. Can God give new birth to this church, you who are this church? Can our prior expectations for rest and retirement give way to these new efforts to live God's truth? It is possible that God might raise up within us new life which could demonstrate to the world around us God's Spirit of truth in action in the world. I'm convinced that was God's desire with Sarah and Abraham and Isaac. The birth of baby Isaac gave great promise to the new parents, but it was the real presence of God in their lives that enlivened Sarah and Abraham. We expect all of our leaders to accomplish great things. I kept reading the web all this week, trying to see what great things the General Assembly was accomplishing. And I'm sure they delved deeply into some of the issues and feel they made their best decisions, but that's not going to complete the process. It's what we do from this point on, not what they did out there. The mantle of ministry does not rest on elders and ministers alone. The new birth lives within all of us. The church will never exemplify the Spirit of God with the people of this community unless that Spirit overflows in our lives. There's a similar invitation now to the one that Sarah received in Matthew's message. During Jesus' visits, he went to all sorts of places, and he saw these people who had needs. They were sheep without a shepherd. They had needs that were yet to be discovered, unmet. He described it as a plentiful harvest with harvesters too few. So Jesus summoned these apostles, the disciples, and he delegated to them the mission that to this day defines the call of every church. They were to minister to the needs of the people with love and compassion. How could you say it any more concisely than that? Minister to the needs of the people with love and compassion. It mattered not whether those people were saints or sinners, tax collectors, scribes, virgins, women of the street. God loved them all. Every person of God's creation was a person of value, but especially valued were the persons in need. We too have been invited to alleviate the ailments of the people and minister to the misery of those who suffer. Jesus calls us to meet the needs of our community. And the primary expression of our faith is through our faithful action. We're parts of a society in which God's design for life is often ignored. We're people so fond of our freedom that even the invitation of our Creator sometimes seems as an imposition that impinges on our independence. Yet God continues to welcome all persons of faith to participate in the perfecting of this creation He has given to us. Each one of us may participate in God's design. I have some symbols that I keep on a window ledge at home in the den, and one of those is a sailboat. How many of you are sailors? A few of you. The thing that I have found fascinating about sailing, which I don't do anymore, I've gotten too old, but it's how I'm able to manipulate the rudder, the leaning, the sail, the position, to coincide with what is being offered to me that over which I have no control. the wind is coming from this way, and I have this little spandex up there, is that what it's called? That tells me which way the wind is meeting the boat. But it moves around all the time. The reality in which I live is like that. It moves around all the time. I have to keep adjusting the rudder and the sails, pulling on this rope and that one. I have to tell Katie to lean this way. That's the way life is. God has given us that opportunity to engage ourselves as though we were the sailboat. We separate the fruits of the faithful from the grapes of wrath. And I'm reminded of the challenge God gave Adam and Eve. They were amidst all this finery of the Garden of Eden, and they were invited to be stewards of all of God's life, to enjoy the bounty of life, but not to eat that one forbidden fruit, to live within God's design, not to try to make it entirely their own. That symbolizes the need, the opportunity we have to be obedient to our Creator, to fit ourselves into God's design rather than telling God, now this is what I want you to do, this is what we need over here, do this now. Have you ever had prayers like that you tell God what to do and He doesn't do it? What we need to do is just tell God, we need you to help us understand our situation and how best to live within it. Give us the strength and the courage to meet the challenges that are before us, that we may become examples of faithful people. We're not just to enjoy the fruits of God's creation. How will our will hold against God's will? The newly pregnant Sarah was filled with incredulous belief, but she welcomed the gift of participation in God's desire. She did not offer a better idea to limit the imagination of God. Can we be that open to the pregnant promises of God in our lives? For centuries, God has created this divine design for all who would respond with faithfulness and obedience. But the danger lies in our failure to fully accept God's invitation. Are we too concerned with the joys of the world? Are we ready to take on more happy opportunities? No, we say, God, please stay within this cubicle which we have created for you. We call it religion. Don't venture into the other arenas of our life. We want to do our thing out here. We'll see you on Sunday morning, God. We mark the rest of things for our own pleasure and profit. Such thoughts may have passed through the minds of Sarah and Abraham when they heard God's call to leave their comfortable security and become God's nomad people on a mission to the world. We know how they responded. How will we respond? Milford is such a comfortable place for us. I love to drive up here and see all the pretty water and the trees, and the pretty homes, the well-employed people. Perhaps we could just build a little wall around this community and landscape it attractively and say, this is our little cubicle. That was the challenge faced by Abraham and Sarah as God called them to venture into other lands. Lives of faith as examples to the world. That was the challenge faced by the disciples as well. Jesus called them to become diplomats to the deprived, demonstrating by their compassion and love the validity of God's love for every person, the efficacy of faith. That challenge faces us. We are the people of God in this place. God's impregnating Spirit is available to each one of us. we too are invited to bear God's child of love, to respond with openness to God's call, to enter into labor and to harvest the fruits of God's planting. But until we respond with faith, as did Sarah, as did the disciples, our divine pregnancy remains but a promising potential. God still calls every person to faithful obedience to the truth and Spirit of God in ministry and mission to all the people of the world. How long will we be too busy harvesting the forbidden fruits of sweet self-centeredness? Are we ready to be God's people from this point on? That is your God-given potential, your pregnant potential. Will you bear God's fruit in your life? Amen.